Super.
And I call up the stage for Leandro Aolita. We're going through another of the segments of the Quantum Research Center of TII. And now we're talking about the work which is done in Leandro's group, and he's the executive director for quantum algorithms. And he's originally from Brazil, I guess, because you received your PhD in Brazil in 2008, and it was the best Brazilian PhD thesis in this year. So congratulations to that. After your PhD, you moved on and did a trip of 7 years through different procedures and institutions in Europe. So first step was the Takehome in Barcelona, and then you moved on to the Freie Universität Berlin. And then you spent some time again in Brazil, and you've been an tenured associate professor at the Universidade Federal de Rio de Janeiro de Brazil. And after that, and I think this must be quite recent, you joined the TII staff as an executive director of quantum algorithms. And as we can see, quantum algorithms are the theme of your presentation today. It's imaginary time evolution algorithms for intermediate scale quantum signal processes. Leandro, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Gerhard, for the nice introduction. Thank you very much. So, yeah, thank you for the nice presentation. I have to clarify, I'm originally from Argentina, but I did do my PhD in Brazil. This is true. I moved after the master's. I moved to Brazil, where I did my PhD with Luis Davidovich, who's also from the quantum optics community. I have to say that nowadays I've moved more to the algorithmic side, and I need to thank Luigi for inviting me here. I guess my talk will be the most computer scientist oriented talk in this event, in this quantum optics event. So I'm really thankful for the audience to being here. I'll try to convey the main messages of our work in an intuitive and introductory way. I have to thank my funding agencies, of course, Technology Innovation Institute, supported by the Emirati government, but also my Brazilian funding agencies, especially the Serra Pilheira Institute. And yeah, let's jump onto the topic, right? So imaginary time evolution. Let me see. So, okay, yeah. All right, so first of all, just one slide to kind of introduce a little bit of the general main message of my group in Abu Dhabi. So yeah, so we work in the design and study of quantum algorithms and application, but our main motivation would be, our main goal could be stated as to narrow the gap from the algorithmic side between quantum hardware and quantum software, right? So all the things. So I'm not just focused in computer scientists. In computer science, I have a physics background, and what we're trying to do is to try to explore killer applications of quantum computers that could be exploited in an intermediate scale soon, right? So this requires. So this regards developing error mitigation and correction schemes. We also work with protocols for verifying and validating many-body quantum devices. And this takes, of course, lots of study of computational complexity. Needless to say, quantum information and quantum optics too. I'm going to talk, as I said, about imaginary time evolution, quantum imaginary time evolution, to which I will refer to as QITE, Q-I-T-E. So QITE simulation is an important application of quantum computation. And of course, as you know, this is a non-unitary transformation, right? So when we talk about QITE, we talk about the following transformation here. So rho is an initial state, and then we have an inverse temperature beta and some Hamiltonian H, right? And this is a transformation that we want to implement. And we would like to be able to do that with a quantum computer so as to be able to control beta and for a general family of Hamiltonians, right? So here, I'm not going to talk about Hamiltonians that appear in analog quantum simulators. I'm really going to focus in Hamiltonians that encode computational problems that are useful for potential applications of quantum computers, right? So of course, one of the main use cases is ground state cooling, right? And this is important for quantum chemistry, but also for combinatorial optimizations, right? So there are many, like I said, many important algorithms whose solution is encoded in the ground state of some Hamiltonian, right? So this is one of the use cases of imaginary time evolution algorithms. But this is not restricted to that. We're also interested to quantum Gibbs state samplers. So this is the preparation of quantum thermal states, essentially at some finite temperature. And as you can guess, this has to do, this allows you for statistical physics applications like partition function estimation. But people have identified also other more computational oriented applications, namely in quantum machine learning, or for instance, in something that's called quantum semi-definite program solvers. So a semi-definite program is like a generalization of the linear program, and it's a type of convex optimization that appears in many, many scientific and technological areas. And one of the main subroutines for this type of algorithms is precisely the ability to prepare quantum thermal states at some controllable temperature, right? There are also quantizations of the Langsos and METS algorithms. All these are use cases of these imaginary time evolution algorithms. And as you can imagine, there's a bunch of works that have tackled this problem of how to simulate imaginary time evolution on a quantum computer. There are seminal contributions that were quantization of the Metropolis algorithm, but they are very, very complex. They require deep quantum circuits, and they involve complex rejection choices that are very difficult to rejection conditions, sorry, that are very difficult to implement on an intermediate scale device. There has also been another line of research that is to formulate imaginary time evolution as a variational optimization. And here one takes a more heuristic approach where you simply minimize an ansatz and try to hope for the best, but many times you can be trapped in a local minimum, and there's no guarantee of that. Here, what I'm gonna focus in is quantum what we call high precision algorithms, right? Where one does have a guarantee in error convergence, right? There's also been another very interesting and recent work by the Caltech group where they simulate quantum imaginary time evolution with unitary evolution. So I'm going to become a little bit more clear. I hope this is going to be clear later. But essentially, if one knows the initial state and one knows the final state, then one can of course connect that with a unitary gate. Now, of course, this involves knowing the initial state and the final state, and there are many conditions for the Hamiltonian also that they assume here. So this is not the type of work that we want to focus here in my talk. What I'm going to try to drive you through today, or to walk you through, is high precision algorithms for imaginary time evolution. And these are, like I said, algorithms where there is a promise on the tolerated error, right? And when I say error, please be aware that I'm not talking about the coherence error or errors or experimental errors here. I'm assuming that we have like a decent intermediate scale device, quantum computer with no errors. But, or if you want to, I'm just considering the error of approximating functions of a Hamiltonian, right? So this is going to become clear. I hope this becomes clear in a moment, right? So the first notion that I need to convey for all of this to make sense is what we call a block encoding of an operator, of a Quitti propagator in this case, right? So like you guys know, imaginary time evolution is not unitary, right? So we need to encode it into some unitary circuit, right? Which is what we have with computers, with quantum computers. So here, what I have here is a unitary that acts on a system register and an ancillary register. The system register is initialized in some state psi, and then we assume that we initialize some ancilla in some state 0. It's a reference state that we use as a computational state. And then we make a measurement on the ancilla and project back onto the 0 state in such a way that after that, the system register is post-selected into this state that involves the imaginary time evolution propagator that we wanted, right? So of course, in other words, this is to say that the Quitti propagator corresponds to some block of this unitary, the block that corresponds to the 0 subspace of the ancillary register, right? So in a more circuit-like picture, what is going on is this. So here's the initial state. You apply this unitary, and you post-select on the ancilla, and here's a state that you prepare. And of course, this is a probabilistic process, right? And with a post-selection probability given by this expression here that depends on the input state. Now, something nice about this type of approach is that so here what we're doing is operator function design, right? So what I'm encoding is the Quitti propagator itself onto one of the blocks of some unitary, right? So this is independent of the input state. The only dependence of the input state comes into the probability of success in the post-selection, right? But the operator itself is done the operator is synthesized independently of the input state, right? And so, of course, yeah, okay, this looks nice and elegant, but how do we circuit synthesize this unitary, right? How do we come up with an efficient circuit that can prepare this unitary, right? And this people have done this. People have tackled this question before. So here I become a little bit more explicit. So before we had a system register and an ancillary register, and now I'm saying that the ancillary register actually has two subsets, one that corresponds to Oracle ancillary qubits and primitive ancillary qubits. So the primitive is like the algorithm itself, right? And the Oracle's ancillary has to, and the Oracle's the ancillary the Oracle ancillary qubits have to do with the Hamiltonian Oracle. So all these algorithms are what we call Oracle-based algorithms, right? So we need some encoding of, the Hamiltonian, the instance problems, the particular Hamiltonian that we're looking at needs to be encoded somewhere, and this is encoded into some unitary that acts on the system and on the Oracle ancillary register that we call the Oracle, the Hamiltonian Oracle, right? And the Oracle is inside these building blocks of the primitive. So the primitive is essentially like an iteration of like a sequence of unitaries that I call V1 to VQ, each of which contains one oracle to the Hamiltonian query. So again, the Hamiltonian Oracle is a unitary that encodes the Hamiltonian in question, and this is called by these blocks, right? So I'm going to try. So my approach here, since I know that this is more technical than the rest of the talks that have been presented, I'm trying to give like an overview, like a general presentation, and then if there's time, I can try to come into a little bit into more detail of what these things are. But this is essentially the shape of all quitted primitives, more or less, that you can find. And there's been two seminal contributions in these two papers here. Now, the highlights, as I said, is that these are high precision algorithms, right? So we can choose up to which error we can approximate this, this function of the Hamiltonian. And of course, the lower the error that we want, the deeper the circuit, right? The more calls to the oracles I will have to do. And the main figure of merit of complexity here is what we call the query complexity, which is the number of oracle calls, right? And it's interesting, this is like a computer scientist notion, but it makes sense to measure the complexity of their computation, to measure the runtime of the computation in terms of the number of calls to the oracle. Because of course, in practice, in experiment, what you're interested in is the number of gates that you have to apply and the depth of the circuit. But this depends on the particular instance, on the particular Hamiltonian that you're studying. However, here in this picture of operator function design, all the complexity is measured in terms of the number of calls to the oracle. And of course, we know that for this to make sense, each oracle call needs also to be efficient, right? But please follow me in this terminology, in this computer scientist terminology. So Q is the number of oracle calls, and this is what we call the query complexity, right? And of course, our goal here is to produce algorithms that use an oracle model as simple as possible, as experimentally friendly as possible, and to make Q as low as possible, to make as few queries to this oracle as possible, right? Now, the last introductory thing that I want to mention is, like I said, so what one does with these quitted primitives is to encode, this is to encode the quitted propagator into a block of a unitary that is then revealed or conditioned on the right measurement outcome of an ancillary, right? So this is an intrinsically probabilistic process. And there are, we need to somehow incorporate this into some deterministic master algorithm in order to have like like an output with certainty, right? We don't want a probabilistic algorithm. We want something deterministic, and this can be done in two main flavors, right? So the first main flavor is probabilistic approach, right? So namely repeat until success. So you take your initial system, your initial ancillary state, you apply the primitive, and you post-select. If you get the wrong measurement outcome, you start from scratch again. And if you get the right outcome, then you know that your system has been projected onto the output state that you wanted, right? And then, of course, and the number of times that you have, on average, the number of times that you have to repeat that is, of course, given by 1 over the success probability that I was mentioning in the previous slides. So that the total runtime of the algorithm is of the order of 1 over the success probability times the complexity of each of these circuits, each of these primitives U beta, right? Which depends not only on beta, but also, as I said, on the approximation error, the tolerator error that we want, right? The second approach is the coherent approach, which is based on something called quantum amplitude amplification, right? This is the most elegant thing that one would do with a large-scale quantum computer, right? So this is very elegant, but it is technically more challenging, experimentally more challenging, because, okay, to begin with, it requires an extra ancillary system that we didn't have here in this approach. But worst of all, this is implemented by a sequence of unitaries. So what you do is you take your primitive U beta and you make like a sequence of them, a long sequence of them interleaved by other unitaries that act on some of the ancillary, on the ancillaries and also on the system register, right? So the nice thing about this is that, you know, the total number of repetitions of your primitive is quadratically better than in the repeat until success scheme, right? This is typical with algorithms based on quantum amplitude amplifications. Whenever you have a quadratic speedup on a quantum algorithm, very likely it comes from quantum amplitude amplification. Quantum amplitude amplification is essentially a generalization of Grover's algorithm, right? And so this is the nice thing, that the number of times that you have to repeat the primitive is quadratically better. But of course, the big caveat of this is that now you have a super deep quantum circuit, which is totally out of reach for today's, for intermediate scale devices, right? So the overall runtime is, like I said, quadratically better in the number of repetitions, but this is out of reach for today, right? We need too deep a quantum circuit for this, and we would like to have solutions. We would like to have improvements for both things, right? You see that the success probability can be very small. In fact, for computationally hard cases, sometimes it can be exponentially small. So any speed up here helps, right? So of course, we would like to have quadratic speedups on the number of times. And of course, we would like to make this query complexity as small as possible, right? With realistic assumptions on a Hamiltonian oracle. And this is the two questions that we tackle in this paper. The paper is still not published. I hope we can post it in the archive soon. So this is a paper in collaboration with my postdoc in Rio, Thais Lima Silva, and another, like a former postdoc of mine, Marcio Tadei, who was in Rio, now he's in Barcelona. Professor Stefano Carrazza, he's the leader of the quantum middleware group in TII in Abu Dhabi, and myself, right? And so what I was gonna say is that, so these are the two questions that we consider. So we want to improve on the query complexity. We want to come up with enhanced primitives that have a better performance in the query complexity than what people have developed so far, but without assuming, you know, we want to keep with realistic assumptions on the oracle, and at the same time, perhaps this is the main result of our paper is we want to get a quadratic speedup, but without increasing the circuit depth so much as one does with a coherent scheme that I was mentioning based on quantum amplitude amplifications, right? So these are the two main questions that we answer, or for which we give some positive contribution in our paper, right? So yeah, so this is the outline for the next couple of slides that I'm going to show. So I'm going to show you enhanced QT primitives and also an enhanced master QT algorithm, right? Which is based on our idea, our contribution based on fragmentation, right? I'll walk you through this. And of course, there's technical things here. So for instance, what we do for operator, what we use, the technical tool that we use for operator function design is quantum signal processing. And I think I won't have time to touch onto this, but you know, depending on the interest of people, we may look at a slide in the Q&A session afterwards, right? So yeah, so what we do is we propose two novel QT primitives. Both are based on this technical idea of quantum signal processing. And like I said, you know, depending on the type of algorithm, on the type of oracle that you assume, then this leads you to a different type of algorithm and with different efficiencies, right? So we look here at two different types of algorithms of oracles. The first one is what we call block encoded Hamiltonian oracles. So what is this? Again, this is a unitary that acts on the system and on the oracle ancillary register in such a way that if you project on the ancillary register, on the oracle ancillary register onto the state zero, you get the Hamiltonian, right? So again, in this case, the Hamiltonian corresponds to the block of a unitary matrix, right? And here I say trash because all I'm saying that, you know, this is something else such that if you add it to this, then you get a unitary transformation. We don't care for that. This is irrelevant because we will project it out, right? The other type of oracle that we consider is based on this idea of is simply real-time evolution Hamiltonian oracle, right? So what I'm saying here is that that the oracle is simply the unitary evolution with respect to the Hamiltonian age, but controlled by a single qubit. And these are, in a sense, much more realistic oracles to assume. So people have studied these block-encoded Hamiltonian oracles, and you can do it. You can encode you can prepare this type of unitaries efficiently, but still requires a logarithmic number of ancillary qubits with the system size, with the number of qubits in the system, right? Whereas here you need just one ancillary qubit, and you may, for instance, consider to kind of simulate this real-time evolution with some simple Trotter expansion, right? So this is very promising for in the more near term, right? So what we do is we develop two different primitives, one for each oracle, and for the block encoded oracle, the query complexity that we get is something nice because it displays an additive dependence on beta and on the log of 1/epsilon, right? Recall that epsilon is the approximation error in the function that approximates your QT propagator that we want to prepare, right? So before, all the works that have done this, that have proposed QT primitives, they have found a multiplicative dependence between beta and the log of 1/epsilon. So we're talking here about it's almost like in certain situations like a quadratic enhancement, a quadratic speed up, right? And so that's the nice thing about it. And now what we do prove, and I'm definitely not going to have time to enter into details, but we prove optimality of this primitive, right? So what we prove is that in the regime of small beta or small epsilon, so high accuracy, then you cannot do better than this. This is proven by fundamental information theoretic arguments, and we prove that that we saturate like fundamental bounds of information theory, right? So this is very nice, and it assumes this type of block encoded Hamiltonian oracles, which, like I said, are a little bit more sophisticated. So here, for the more experimentally friendly version of oracles that we look at, we have a multiplicative dependence. Again, it's linear in beta and in log of 1/epsilon, but we get a multiplicative dependence here. So it's slightly worse, but this is the price we pay in return for having a much more experimentally friendly oracle, right? Remember that like the main motivation here is to do quantum algorithms. So here in Abu Dhabi, like the main motivation is to do quantum algorithms with a feet on the ground, right? We really want to try to give contributions to near-term quantum hardware or intermediate scale devices, so to say. So this is what I'm going to show for the moment about primitives. So the main technical tool that we use for these primitives is, like I said, this quantum signal processing. Is a powerful technique. It's a magical technique. It's almost black magic when you see it for the first time. It's for operator function design. It allows you to prepare functions of operators in a very efficient way. And as you can see, this has many, and as you can imagine, this has many applications in different quantum algorithms. So this was proposed originally by papers by Low and Chuang and collaborators, and it was further developed by Van Apeldoorn and Guillen and collaborators in these papers. I'm not going to enter into detail. I have a couple of slides, depending on the interest. In the end, we can come back to this. But let me now move to the second question. That 10 minutes, right? Excellent, I'm doing good. So let me now move to the second part of my talk, to the second question that I considered, right? So remember that we were in the beginning, like, QT primitives are based on post-selection. So again, I repeat this. So they are intrinsically probabilistic. You have to do something with them in order for the algorithm to become deterministic. And the two types of algorithms that I mentioned today for this were repeat until success. That's what I call probabilistic scheme, and the coherent scheme, which is based on quantum amplitude amplification, right? So we're going to come up with a new idea here, something that we dubbed fragmentation, and it's very simple. It's actually remarkably simple, the idea. So what we're going to do is, instead of taking our system and our ancillas and applying the entire QT primitive up to inverse temperature beta, our final inverse temperature, right? What we're going to do is we're going to run the algorithm, but in fragments, right? So first, we're going to run a QT primitive for some small inverse temperature, delta beta 1, and we're going to post-select. We're going to do it probabilistically, right? So again, like here, there's no no quantum amplitude amplification. So here we just simply, old school repeat until success, but with the difference that we're post-selecting at a much smaller inverse temperature, right? If we fail, if the measurement fails, we start from scratch again. But if we succeed, we move forward to the next step. And the next step is implementing a quitter primitive, but now with inverse temperature delta beta 2, right? Of course, for this to work, the sum of all the delta betas of all the fragments has to be equal to beta, to the entire inverse temperature, to the full inverse temperature at which we aim. And by doing that, the claim is that post-selecting at much smaller inverse temperatures yields an enormous complexity saving. This saves you lots of circuit complexity, lots of circuit depth, and also of course lots of gates and runtime, right? And so this is of course very technical, and we prove theorems in our paper. We also do numerics, but I wanna give you like a glimpse of how this could be plausible, right? Okay, so without entering into details, but this is what like a computer scientist's view of an experiment on this would look like, right? So you have your initial state psi, and you apply the first fragment, right? You try your first fragment and say that you succeeded, you made it here, but no, sorry, the first fragment, this fails, right? So you go back and start from scratch. Then here you succeeded on the first fragment, and then like once you're there, sorry, I start again. So in the beginning, you implement the first fragment, and when you're going to implement the second one, you fail. You obtain the wrong post-selection outcome. So then you throw everything away and start from scratch. Now you start again. You succeed in the first fragment. You succeed in the second fragment. You're lucky to the third fragment, but you fail with the last post-selection. Okay, you throw everything and start from scratch again, right? And you go on like that, right? At some point in this green trajectory here, you complete the entire sequence, all the fragments, right? Which in this case, for simplicity, I put just 4 fragments. And so when you do that, it's clear that at the output you will get the final state that you wanted, right? And what we show, this is perhaps the mathematical contribution that we show, is that we show that the number of trials, the number of experiments that you need for this is the same as you would have done in the old school repeat until success scheme. So the number of experimental runs is the same, but the difference is that in each experimental run, in the old school repeat until success, you are running the entire quitter primitive, the entire circuit. So you're wasting, whenever you had to abort, whenever you got the wrong post-selection, you are wasting the entire circuit, the entire runtime of that algorithm, the entire number of gates. And so what I'm saying here is that this is an algorithm that runs the same number of trials, but in each trial, most trials, you're typically running very, very, very shallow quantum circuits, so you're not wasting so much circuit complexity, right? So this is the main qualitative difference here, and I think that this is more or less like the main idea of our technique, right? So of course, let me show you some result. Like I said, we do prove theorems, and when we study numerics for different types of Hamiltonians, so randomizing lattices, randomizing lattices with local transverse field. We study also Heisenberg fully connected graphs. We do exhaustive numerical exploration of this. And here what I'm showing you is like what it looks like one of these instances, right? So what I'm plotting. So here, this is 10,000. These are the averages over 10,000 random Ising lattices. This for algorithms, this is important for something called weighted max cut problem, which is an NP-hard problem. This is computer scientists, put it at a high level in the polynomial hierarchy of complexity, of computational complexity. And so essentially, you may have like some network, some lattice without any pattern. This is random, right? And they are connected by Ising interactions. So this is very, very hard. It contains long-range interactions, and this is very computationally hard, right? So what we do here, what we look at here is the query complexity. This is the overall query complexity, the total runtime of our algorithm. And in green, I plot the probabilistic scheme. In orange, the coherent scheme based on amplitude amplification. And in blue, our fragmented, the complexity of our fragmented algorithm, right? The runtime of our fragmented algorithm, right? 5 minutes. That's more than enough. Thank you. so here I show it for 5 qubits and for 10 qubits, but we've done simulations up to 16 qubits. And as I said, we also have analytical evidence for under some assumptions. And the nice thing that you can see here is that, you know, in the beginning, the orange curve corresponding to as expected, the probabilistic scheme repeat until success is the worst one. It sits up here. And in the beginning, the coherent one based on amplitude amplification performs better. You know, the blue one is here in the middle, but then there is some critical inverse temperature from which on our fragmented algorithm starts outperforming the coherent one with based on amplitude amplification, right? And this critical inverse temperature depends, of course, on the number of qubits. So in the paper, we characterize that. An interesting thing is that this is not an unphysically high inverse temperature at which this happens. This is an intermediate range of temperature. So this is well within the regime of interest for practical algorithms. And so what I'm saying is that there is always an inverse temperature. If you want to implement QUITI, there is always an inverse temperature from which on it's better to implement the fragmented algorithm than implement the coherent one. And of course, you know, another very important thing here is that here, so for instance, what I plot here is essentially the circuit depth, the query depth. And of course, here now it's the coherent one that is the worst. This sits up there. I mentioned that, you know, this is for the coherent approach, you need very deep quantum circuits. And the remarkable thing about this fragmented scheme is that it requires only the same circuit depth as you would have got with old school repeat until success. So I hope you can appreciate the beauty of this result. Of course, the numbers are still very high. You know, this requires 10 to the 4 queries. So these are still demanding for nowadays technology. But again, this goes in the direction of trying to bridge the gap between quantum software and quantum hardware from the algorithmic sector, right? So what I'm saying here, and I hope you can appreciate the beauty of this, is that, you know, we can beat coherent method based on quantum amplitude amplification without any overhead on ancillary qubit numbers or any overhead in circuit depth, right? So this I think is a very promising line of research for intermediate scale quantum devices over the next years, right? So with this, I'm gonna finish. So the take-home messages is QUITI simulation algorithms are important for hard optimizations, machine learning applications, semi-definite program solvers, and of course for statistical simulations. And we have contributed to this with 2 novel QUITI primitives, one of which has an optimal scaling of query complexity in certain regime, in the small beta and high accuracy regime or high accuracy regime. And the other one, another primitive that is a little bit slightly worse scaling, but is much more experimentally friendly in terms of how to implement the oracle, the Hamiltonian oracle in an experiment, right? We did some contributions to quantum signal processing. I didn't tell you anything about this. It's not that we just, you know, took the quantum signal processing framework and applied it. We developed our own variants of this. So our work also provides some novel technical contributions to this framework. And the last thing that I showed you is perhaps the most important thing here, the most important take-home message is that we have a novel master QUITI algorithm, which is based on this idea of fragmentation, right? And the main thing is that there is always a temperature for which it compensates you more to do simply fragmentation than to try amplitude amplification, right? Our algorithm beats amplitude amplification in terms of overall runtime, and it does it without any overhead in ancillary qubit numbers or circuit depth. This is many outlooks, right? We could, one of the research lines that I want to pursue in my group here is to look at fragmentation as a more generic procedure where you could think of like more general applications of fragmented scheme. For instance, for matrix arithmetic, matrix inversion, matrix multiplication. You could think of quantum Monte Carlo algorithms that could benefit from this idea. And this is a very promising research line that I plan to tackle with my team in Abu Dhabi, right? In Abu Dhabi and in Rio. I have to say that I have half of my family still in Rio. So here is Thais. She's the first author of all the results I'm showing. This is Marcio. He's now in Barcelona. He's the second author. There's Tiago, Alan, they're postdocs in Rio. Renato and Lucas, they're PhDs. They're coming to Abu Dhabi in the second semester. There's also these former students and postdocs that I had in Rio. And of course, the Abu Dhabi family is growing too. So Ingo and Jan, they're postdocs. They arrived a couple of weeks ago here in Abu Dhabi. Ingo arrived from the Freie Universität Berlin, and Giancarlo from Brazil, from the Natal Institute. There's also Abdullah, Sergi, Carlos, and Ruge. They're postdoc and students of Jose Ignacio, but they participate in the discussions of my group and the group meeting. We collaborate together. And there's, of course, Stefano Carrazza, is, like I said, the director of the quantum middleware group. And there's his student, Stavros, which also participates in the discussion of my group meeting. So all these people are part of that family. And of course, there are many external collaborators. I've been doing many works on quantum non-locality. I've been doing many works with, like I said, certification of many quantum devices, the machine learning connection. I'm also interested in computational advantages from more exotic resources like quantum superpositions of causal orders. And this is the type of things that we're interested in my group. And if you like these things, if you're curious about these topics, and if you are an excellent candidate, then please do consider to write me an email. We're recruiting this year, also next year, there will be a second round of recruiting. And with this, I thank you very much for your attention, okay? Thank you.
And thank you very much from our side for this presentation. And I see already a first question in the question and answer box. This is by Andreas Osterloh. Maybe we can unmute Andreas so that he can pose his question directly.
Yeah, I was, thank you at first for the interesting talk. There you were presenting some oracles. And actually the oracle is usually used in quantum computation as the problem. So you have it, and you transform your state, and then put the oracle none on the oracle that you basically don't know, and so on and so forth. And then you scale it with the number of oracle calls. And here actually you were trying to create an oracle or something. Would you comment on this?
Thank you very much, Andreas, for the very precise question indeed. So this is something that I didn't touch into detail. So actually, like here, I'm assuming. So we're doing both things. In what I showed here, I am assuming that I start from some unitary that encodes the oracle, and I process this oracle to come out with a quitter propagator. So let me show this slide here. So this is something that I had prepared because I knew that people would ask this. So what I'm saying, so the oracle here is some unitary UH, right? And I assume that I have this for the moment, right? But then of course we're also interested in how to prepare this unitary in the lab, right? But essentially, like you were saying, so what we do is, like you could think of the oracle as a very simple function of the Hamiltonian, right? We want to make it as simple as possible, right? And what you want to do is what we call quantum signal processing. This is analogous to signal processing in the sense that the oracle is a simple function of the Hamiltonian, and you would like to input it into a circuit that like kind of promotes it into a more complex function of the Hamiltonian, right? So here, these are the types of exemplary oracles that I was assuming. These are unitaries, again, that encode inside the unitary. The unitary is what brings the information about the Hamiltonian. And what you do is to transform this simple matrix functions of the Hamiltonian into a more complex matrix function, or the matrix function that you want, that in this case is the exponential of the Hamiltonian, right? So in this case, this is why, like what I said is that, the primitive, everything that you do in yellow here does not depend on the Hamiltonian. All the information of the Hamiltonian is encoded into the oracle, right? You assume that you have this type of unitaries, and from that you construct like you do quantum signal processing that allows you to arrive at a more complex function of the Hamiltonian, right? So like for the results that I showed. So you assume you have an oracle, you assume you have a unitary encoding the Hamiltonian, but then of course we're also thinking of experimental implementations. So I have part of my team really like doing quantum circuit design of these unitaries. Of course, this is of course crucial, right? I mean, you know, that's what I was saying, that we want to make algorithms that assume quantum oracles as simple as possible, because they are the ones that we will have to implement from scratch in the lab, right? So yeah, in this talk, I assume that I have these quantum oracles, but part of my team, part of my effort, part of our efforts goes also in the direction of how to synthesize these quantum oracles, right? For Hamiltonians of interest in in quantum computing applications. I hope this helped. I hope this helped answering your question.
So you are wanting to implement some oracles easily to the experimental situation.
Yes, for each experimental, like we want to have a technique that works. You know, imagine we want to write quantum software someday, so we want to have like a plug and play algorithm that works for any Hamiltonian, right? And so, you know, so this is what the primitive does, the yellow part does, right? Of course, for each instance, then, you know, this is a nice way to think about it, because you isolate everything that has to do with the Hamiltonian instance is inside the oracle. The rest, you just do the same all the time, independently of what's the Hamiltonian. As long as the Hamiltonian is properly encoded into this type of oracles, then you apply the same quantum circuit. You could think of the primitive, of the quitter primitive, as a quantum circuit with open slots for you to insert your Hamiltonian oracle for your Hamiltonian of choice, right? That's more or less the idea, the way we think about this.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for the nice question.
Okay, and thank you for answering. There's Greg who has another question.
Nice. Hi, Greg.
Hi,
nice to see you. So many years. My God. Good to see you.
Right. So I have actually two questions.
Yeah.
So you have this, I like the idea that you partition it into small time intervals. but each one has some probability of success. And so the eventual success is going to be P to the power n, depending on the number of partitions. And that's going to be...
Pardon me?
So assuming the probability of success is P, then you partition it into n parts. Then the probability of success over the whole trajectory is going to be P raised to the power of n.
No.
That's going to be exponentially small.
No. Okay, that's a great question. That's getting more technical. That's a great question, but it's not the case. So you see that in a sense, so if you look at this picture here, so what happens is that if you succeed in the first step, like the success probability depends on the input state and on how high beta is, right? If you want to go to a high beta, so closer to the ground state, you want to do ground state cooling, then of course the success probability will be small. But the thing is that you could think that you start from a state at 0 inverse temperature, but if you succeed in the first step, then you're closer to the final goal, right? So they're not independent, these success probabilities. The success probability of the second step is higher if you already succeeded in the first step, right? They don't scale exponentially bad, because and also, you know, the inverse temperatures at each fragment, they're much smaller than initially, right? So it's not that the total success probability is a product of the success probabilities of all these fragments. So this is just like a minor technical comment. However, you are right. You're very, very accurate in something that here we're talking about hard optimization. So for instance, with these quitter algorithms, you can solve NP-complete problems. And we know that a quantum computer is not good enough to solve efficiently NP-complete problems. So there is a subclass of problems, the hardest problems that you got, that you won't be able to solve it in a polynomial time. So for those problems, typically the success probabilities are exponentially small. But this is always the case. And people do that. People run these algorithms classically, and they take exponentially long time because they're important algorithms. But what I'm saying here is that we will have a quadratic, you know, if you have 2 to the n or square root of 2 to the n, it makes a huge difference, right? So so you're right that the hard instances their complexity will still be exponential, but we will have a quadratic advantage for those instances, and we do it without increasing the circuit depth or the number of ancillas. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. But you are right. Hard instances will still take a suprapolynomial time.
Right. The second question that I want to ask is regarding this repeat until success. In some sense, the way I look at repeat until success is that if you succeed, you succeed. But if you don't succeed, then you can actually know how to change the output back to the input without repeating the whole preparation again. Because preparation is typically very expensive.
Yes.
So I was thinking if that is possible, in other words, if you get 0, 0, then of course you have succeeded. But if you have 0, 1, you can actually do a unitary operation on your output state so that you revert back to the original state. And then in this case, you don't have to do, there are some advantages in that. So this could be something like weight measurements.
That's a beautiful idea. We haven't thought about that. That's a really accurate observation. Of course, this would require typically. So when we do this block encoding of the quitter propagator, simply we look at the block at which we're interested, and then the rest is irrelevant, so to say, because we will project it out. Now, what you're saying is that to take advantage of that, so as not to have to prepare the entire system from scratch. That's right. This is a very interesting observation. In principle, I don't see any reason why that should not be possible. However, there may be some technical issues because all this tango about quantum signal processing, you know, you put all your efforts into the number of queries, the number of blocks of your circuit that you do, you're trying to optimize it so as to get the good block that you want. Now, if apart from that, because you have to know which other, you know, in order for you to undo the wrong unitary, you have to know what's in the other block of your unitary. And for that, I have the intuition, I have the guess that perhaps this would end up blowing up the query complexity of your quantum signal processing method, right? It could be, but in principle, it's possible, and it's a really nice idea that we didn't think of. I mean, yeah, this is something that we could think of. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other question, and I think it's time to move on. So let's thank Leandro again for his presentation.
Thank you very much.